Hey everyone, it's Alex with Home Reno Secrets, where we teach you how to do your own renovations like a pro. Today we're doing something really special for you DIY enthusiasts. We're tackling the kitchen backsplash, the unsung hero of every amazing kitchen. Now I know what you're thinking, Alex, I can't even draw a straight line. Fear not, my friends, because in this video we're going to show you how to make the perfect layout, how to actually put up the tiles, and then how to grout to perfection. So stick around, like and subscribe, and we'll get right into how to do that right now.
I like to set up all the tools I'll need with a drop sheet on the kitchen countertops. This is my traditional snap cutter, and that's for the easy cuts, but then I also have my grinder set up outside for the more tricky cuts I'll need to make. If you don't have any of these major tools, you can just rent them from your local hardware store.
I usually have a knife on me, and the easiest thing I find to unscrew the plug cover is the end of it actually. I don't stick it out, I just keep it back here, but this little thing undoes these screws really easily. So I've got the plug cover off, and then I've got a #1 Robertson, and that usually does these for me. And then what I'll do is I'll use electrical tape, and with the power off, I usually tape around my screws with electrical tape, and it just gives you a little bit more protection in case the box touches the side of the outlet. That's when you'll get an arc. Okay, and that one's out of the way, and you're ready to tile. The simplest thing to do to make sure your backsplash is level and all your grout lines line up is to use a laser. They used to use like physical levels and chalk lines and all that, but this just makes your job so much easier. I've set up a telescopic pole here, and it's magnetic on the back of the laser. So you just set it on, turn it on, and then you can move it up with each row that you tile, and then you make sure that every row is in line and nice and straight. The first thing I check is the level. So I check if the countertops are level, and this is how I know if the kitchen cabinet guys have been playing or if they've been on point. So I'll measure at my two farthest ends is 3 5/8, and this is 4 inches down here. So that means I'm off at least 3/8 of an inch from that side of the kitchen to that side. I'll need to adjust for that when I cut my bottom row. So every kitchen backsplash will have a little bit different layout, and it depends how you choose to do that. On something like this, my goal here is to center the backsplash tiles on this range and the range hood. I think that's going to be the focal point kind of this kitchen. So in this type of a kitchen, I want to first try and measure it all out to see if I can center it on this section here. If I have my first row and then my grout line's right here, what I'll do is I'll measure to each section where I'll have a break. And then what I'll do is I'll take my tape measure, go back to my storyboard, and check out where my tiles will line up so that I don't have a really skinny tile ending up here, or a really skinny tile ending up that end, or a skinny tile ending up way at the corner there. Okay, so this is what I call a storyboard, and it's super helpful for figuring out how big your pieces will be on the wall. You never want to end up with small pieces in tile. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but most often you can make it the exact way you want it and have big enough pieces so it looks good. So now I'll show you the first example from the center line in between my stove on the wall and the edge of the window. So you make that mark, so it starts on a grout line, and then this is the edge of the window. So if the edge of the window is here, then we'll end up with a piece this big, and that looks really good for this row, but I'm going to stagger my tiles like this. If my edge of my window is here, then the smallest tile I'll end up with is this one right here, and for me, that's a good size, and it won't stand out to you. This is 1 3/4 inches, and that's definitely big enough and will look really good going up the side of the window. So that's for lengthwise horizontally, and then you have to start looking at the vertical space. A few different things that I'll run into here are this distance up to the bottom of the range hood. So I'm going to tile to here, and I want to make sure that I have a decent sized tile at the top, preferably a big piece. And I also want to start with a big piece. So once I've got my measurement, I'll write it down, I'll also check this measurement. And that way when I go to my tiles, I can mark that on my storyboard and see exactly where I'll end up at the top and how big this piece will be. So what I'll do is I'll measure this out from the countertop, if that's the bottom there, and I'll end up with a piece this big when I go to install it. I know that I have to take a little bit of tile off of the bottom so I can level my tiles at the countertop because the countertop is off. So when I do that, I can take pretty much 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch off the bottom, and I'll still end up with a really nice piece here at 30 1/4 if I do that. So now we know our layout, we're going to cut our bottom row to size. This is a full tile from center, so I don't need to cut this at all, but I will need to cut this and notch it in an L shape around this countertop here. I bring this one close to here, using a spacer. And that shows me here where to notch this. So now I know how far over to cut this notch. I'm going to get the height. So I've got this marked here, the end. I'll use my tape measure to the top of the laser. So that is 3 3/16. And right here is 3 1/16. And I'll mark that on this tile. I use my square. And now you go cut this out with the grinder. And then I'm using here 60 grit diamond sanding pad to just clean up those edges and make them look like this is a factory tile. So I've started in the center and cut the bottom row all the way to here, and now I've come up to an outlet. These can be a little bit tricky because sometimes you don't cut it big enough and then you can't put your cover plate on and you end up having to take your grinder to the wall and cut it while it's already installed. So I'll show you how to do it now so that way you don't have to bring your grinder out and cut it in your new kitchen. So I know this is the center of this tile and that will be where my next row starts. So what I've done is I've marked this and I've marked the edge of the next tile above it. So now I can get rid of this piece. I can put this tile exactly where it belongs. I'll mark the edges of my box. So I've got this. And what I do is I take my measuring tape and I measure from here to the bottom of this metal here. And that's where you're gonna mark on your tile to cut across. The only thing you have to remember is to notch an extra semicircle right in the middle to make sure that you can screw your cover plate back on to the outlet when you're done. This is what your cut piece should look like. You should have 2 notches, and then that way this cover plate, those screws will go in and you won't have any trouble.
I'm using an adhesive to set these tiles instead of a traditional mortar because it's a little bit less messy to mix and it will save you some time. I'm also using a 1/4 by 3/8 trowel to apply the adhesive directly to each tile and then setting it on the wall piece by piece. I find if you're a little bit slower or still have some cuts to make, it's easier to do it piece by piece rather than applying the adhesive to the entire wall. Along the counters, I like to use red shims instead of the spacers as it helps you get your first row level with the laser line. In between the rest of the tiles, I just use traditional 1/16 spacers.
the homeowner decided not to wrap the corner and not to tile this side. However, if you wanted to, I like to wrap my corners. So whatever I've cut off of this last tile here, if you measured this and this, it would be the length of one full tile. Now we're ready to grout, and I'm going to walk you through a few of the tools that I use that make this job a whole lot easier. So you'll need a bucket with warm water and a sponge, your painter's tape to mask up any surfaces that you don't want grout to get on, like your painted walls, up against your range hood, the stainless steel. And I have a few floats here. I have this bigger one for the big open sections where there aren't many obstacles. And I have this smaller one that's 6 inches by 2 inches, and that's gonna be easier to get underneath those windows and in the tight areas. And then I also have my Olfa knife, which is gonna help me gently clean out any of the grout joints before we start putting in the actual grout material. And that way we end up with nice clean grout joints that look really good. So the first thing I like to do before I start cleaning my tiles is to get my outlets out of the way. We've added some depth to the wall with this new tile, so you may need some longer screws. Right here I have number 6 1.25 inch long machine screws, and that'll help you reach the box at the back and screw the outlet back in. I start by wiping off any surface residue with my sponge and warm water, and if there's anything that I can't get with the sponge, I'll use my Olfa knife, just the very edge of it, to gently take out the material in between the grout joints. You have to be very careful because you can end up chipping a tile if you're too rough. Another thing that's really helpful with this process is we used a white setting material, and we've also got white tiles. So that helps if I miss anything or there's some left behind, you won't necessarily see it when we put in the final grout. If you have a new paint job on your walls or a range hood that you want to protect, just use some painter's masking tape and you should be good. For the grout, we're using the Mapei Ultra Color Plus FA. The color we have here is called Avalanche. They do have a brighter color, but when I held this chip up to the tile, it was a really close match, so I decided to go with the Avalanche color. With this grout, it's easier to work in smaller sections than to get too far ahead of yourself, because if this sets up and hardens and you haven't cleaned your joints and made it look nice, then you're gonna be in big trouble and you won't be able to correct that mistake. So I start with a little bit of water in the bottom of our mixing bucket. That might even be too much. We'll see. Put a little bit less. And then I'll put a mask on for this because it can... Oh, disaster. Too much water. When you're applying the grout, you want to put a little bit of grout on the edge of your float and then really work it into the joints. You need to fill up all the way in behind, all the way to the wall. So that's really important, to work at all different directions and angles to make sure it's really packed full. So for your initial wipe, you want to just get the main big residue off. Then you'll come back once the surface is clean and clean out these joints a little bit. If you don't clean out these joints enough, it'll make your 1/16 really nice small grout joints look way bigger, like 1/4 inch of a grout joint. So in order to do that, on my second pass, I really work the joints. So see how it's a little bit recessed in the joint. That's what you want. You don't want it to be proud like this section up here. See how it's really thick? If I work it, it looks much better. During any stage when you're wiping down your tiles or wiping the grout off of your tiles, you want to wet your sponge completely so it's clean and wring it out completely. You don't want to be adding more water onto your grout when you're wiping it down. Okay, so we're almost done the grouting process. After I've done my second pass, I usually clean all my tools, get a fresh bucket of water, and do my third and final pass on my tiles and my countertop, so that way it's clean when you come back for the next day. Over time, maybe a few years, you'll get a crack between the countertop and your tile. Also, you'll get it in the corner. So if we had tiled this section here, you could get it in between those two walls. So what I'll use is translucent silicone, and that will hide any cracks that may appear over time. You want to use a really high quality silicone like this one. They'll usually sell it at a kitchen and bath, or your tile supplier will have it. This one's translucent, which means it's clear, but it is a little bit cloudy in color.